I'm your host, named bin Mohammad Rafi. Here is your YouTube channel, Zamir Universal. I think the mere name of my channel says about consciousness and people who are soulless and they are used to blackmailing others just because they pay a little more to somebody. Actually, they created themselves the League of Nations in 40s, and that sort of raised up to United Nations. The only edge, I think, at that time the America had end of Second World War. They used and frightened the whole world by dropping first nuclear bomb in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Although everyone knows that Japanese had already surrendered and there was no need to do that. But in order to keep their hegemony and be, got the world blackmailed and suppress the whole world, the whole planet, they wanted to frighten them that they can do this to your cities, and so you accept us as superpower, and so the superpower will have the New York, the office of that, first the League of Nations, then the United Nations, and then obviously they hand-picked 3 or 4 people who distributed the whole world among themselves as 5 full members of the Security Council. First there were 4, and years later, I think if Pakistan had not actually helped H&I and the Henry Kissinger, who begged Pakistan, and Pakistan sort of mediated and got Chinese introduced into the member United Nations and permanent member with a veto power, the same as Russians, as British, French, and American. First of all, this was not based on just and not what is justly, the power given, and this is, a full power which should no one have given to these 5 people, especially the veto power. These Security Council permanent members, if they were honest people, which the Americans aren't, if they were normal human beings, which they are not, if they were fair human beings, which they are not, whether they are human beings or not, the biggest terrorists in the world, the biggest liars, the robbers, the slave traders, and you name it, hodgepodge from other countries, and how they cheated and deceived and killed and raped the women and the slaves they brought, and then the natives, the American Indians, they took all their land, their graves, and on the false promises, they got their kids, stripped them, changed them into skirts, put them in churches so that they have more Christians, although the native Americans, they didn't. So every single American, mostly white, who came from Europe, were these immigrants. So when person like Trump or any of the Americans says that we are the one who will decide that who comes in and who goes out, and who can vote and who cannot, and who is an invader, who isn't, I think that you can understand the filthy and black face of these immigrants themselves who came begging. Even Donald Trump's father, if you look at the pictures and his torn clothes when he came as an immigrant in New York and set up his, real estate business, how poor he was, and then how the Jews helped even his son, who considers himself as the handsome most, and the old woman having a crash on him, and a God's and worldly white man. How stupid, how dishonest, how immoral, how corrupt. Every sin this man had, and unless they were bailed out by the Jews, the Rothschild family and the richest Jewish family, he would have been in that. Now even they gave him 100 millions for the present election. So they wanted a puppet and a stooge who should there and have the whole of you, whatever color you are, that you should be the slaves and work for them, pay your taxes, and all those taxes should go to the people who helped them with billions. And they were, obviously Jews, and thrown out of Germany. Why Hitler spared them and left them, I leave it to you or the history pages. It's not my subject today. My subject is that this thing is unfair. United Nations Security Council is just symbolic and has been as a little puppet, is a little puppy dog, because the Americans, they said, we pay more to most of the United Nations, other branches like UNICEF, like WHO, UNDP, and Human Rights, Watch, and there are many, there which they look after and provide food and shelter, and they help. So the idea was, but exploited by the criminals, and they had the knowledge and experience with the natives, and they did the same thing with the slaves they brought, and which turned into now, African Americans. And what you expect that they will do now when they are cornered by supporting the war criminal? And Netanyahu, another dirty, filthy alien, came from Poland and changed his name. So look at the character of a person, that he just continuing genocide and massacre just to save his, political career, so that he doesn't go to jail. So this is the basic thing which Donald Trump, both are criminals, both are womanizer, both are pedophile, both are the dirtiest, filthiest war criminals. So, the birds of feather flock together. So I think the stupidity is on the part of Mohammed bin Salman, or Qatar or UAE or any other Muslim, even Pakistan or Indonesia or Egypt or Jordan. Every one of them, I think, and they are lost their faith. They are no more Muslims. I'm sorry to say, it's a very, very strong word for me to use. They are all infidel, kafirs, because their God is, the very best thing is Tawheed, to believe in oneness of God, and the only superpower, that's Almighty Allah, God as you Christians call it, and in Arabic is Allah Subhan. So that's the real story, and you'll hear
of Palestine, Arab complicity in genocide. Brothers and sisters, and to the rulers who hear these words, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, Egypt, Jordan, and the rest who hide behind silence, I speak to you directly. You call yourselves guardians of Islam, protectors of Arab dignity, custodians of the holy sites, leaders of the Muslim world. But what have you done while Gaza burns? What have you done while Palestine bleeds? While children dig through rubble with their bare hands, you have turned your backs. You have extended your hands not to your brothers in Palestine, but to those who murder them. Saudi Arabia, you move step by step toward normalization with Israel, opening your skies to their planes, whispering in Washington's ear that you are ready to make peace while your brothers and sisters lie in mass graves. You hold the keys to the holiest places in Islam, yet your silence on Palestine is louder than any sermon. You buy weapons from America by the billions arms that strengthen the same empire that fuels Israel's bombs. What is your excuse? That your throne depends on their approval? That you fear Washington more than you fear God? Your silence has become your shame, your betrayal, a stain that will never be washed from your legacy. Emirates, you have gone even further, rushing to embrace Israel openly. You did not just whisper, you signed. You turned the betrayal into law with the Abraham Accords. You opened your ports, your banks, your arms to Zionists while Gaza was being starved and bombed. Today, Israeli companies flourish in Dubai. Your armies train together. Your officials smile alongside the very men who order massacres. How can you parade yourself as a modern leader when your progress is built on the bones of Palestinian children? Do you not feel shame when you walk in your glittering streets, knowing they are paved with betrayal? Qatar, you play a clever game. To the world you pose as Gaza's benefactor, Al Jazeera amplifies their cries, and you hand out aid. But your aid is drip-fed under the watchful eye of Israel, a leash to control resistance rather than a sword to liberate it. You host leaders of Hamas, but only under conditions written by Washington and Tel Aviv. Do you not see that your support has become a cage, not a path to freedom? You have made yourself the gatekeeper of survival, not the ally of liberation. Do not pretend this is solidarity, it is control. Your hands too are stained with the shame of calculated betrayal. And Egypt, your betrayal is perhaps the heaviest of all. You hold Rafah, the only door not controlled by Israel, and instead of opening it to life, you turned it into another wall of death. When Gaza screamed for food, medicine, and mercy, you shut the gates. You watched children die for lack of antibiotics. You watched the wounded bleed out because ambulances could not pass. You destroyed tunnels that carried bread and water, not bombs. And when convoys from across the world, people of conscience from Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas came to your borders begging you to open Rafah so they could deliver food and medicine, what did you do? You did not open the gates. You sent your soldiers to block them. You forced them to stand in the desert sun while people in Gaza starved a few kilometers away. They begged you with tears in their eyes. They pleaded for compassion, and you answered them with barbed wire and rifles. Shame on you, Egypt. Shame on your generals. Shame on your leaders. Shame on every hand that held those gates shut while Gaza's children cried for bread. Jordan, you, who claim to be the custodian of Jerusalem's holy sites, the guardian of Al-Aqsa, yet year after year you renew your treaties with Israel, you coordinate intelligence, you ensure that no true resistance rises from your soil. Your people march by the millions, they cry for Palestine, but you answer them with silence and repression. You claim to guard Al-Aqsa, but in truth, you have guarded Israel's security. You let occupation thrive while pretending to hold keys of honor. Do you not feel the weight of shame, standing as guardian of a holy place while you betray its people? But this betrayal is not new. It stretches back decades, carved into the wounds of Palestinian history. In 1978, Egypt signed the Camp David Accords with Israel, breaking the Arab front and normalizing with the occupier while Palestinians remained stateless, displaced, and under siege. Anwar Sadat shook hands with Menachem Begin while Israeli tanks remained in the West Bank and bombs fell on Lebanon. Egypt claimed peace for itself while leaving its brothers behind. That betrayal opened the door for others. Jordan followed in 1994 with the Wadi Araba Treaty, giving Israel not only recognition, but water, security coordination, and legitimacy. While Palestinians were being choked by settlements, Jordan turned occupation into a legal neighbor. In the 1990s, the Oslo Accords, shaped and signed under the watchful eyes of Washington, created an illusion of peace while entrenching occupation. Arab states applauded it, funded it, and pressured Palestinians to accept crumbs while Israel expanded settlements. They knew it was a trap, yet they played along, trading away resistance for photo opportunities and handshakes. And now in our time, the Abraham Accords have brought the betrayal into the open. The Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, they signed with Israel without even pretending to secure Palestinian rights. They signed for weapons, for trade, for recognition from Washington, and they paraded it as peace. This is not peace, it is profit from genocide. Saudi Arabia stands on the edge, waiting for its turn, negotiating openly with Washington about when, not if, it will normalize. Even as Gaza burns, their talks continue. Even as children are buried under rubble, they plan their next deal. And while all this unfolded, where were the Arab armies? Where were the so-called defenders of the Ummah? Not in Gaza, not in Jerusalem, not in Geneva. They were in Yemen dropping bombs on the poorest nation in the region. They were in Libya, in Syria, crushing their own people. They were in their own streets, jailing men and women whose only crime was raising the flag of Palestine. All of you together, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Qatar, Egypt, Jordan, you do not just stand by. You crush your own people when they speak out. You jail the voices of conscience. You silence imams from the pulpits. You chase down activists on social media. You unleash tear gas and prisons on your own citizens who cry for Gaza. You fear the rise of a free Palestine, Because a free Palestine would inspire your own people to rise against your corruption, your palaces, your fragile crowns. You fear resistance more than you fear occupation. You fear your own people more than you fear God. Do not pretend your hands are clean. The evidence is carved into history. Emirati handshakes with Zionists, Egyptian bulldozers destroying the tunnels of life, Jordan's treaties securing water for Israel while Palestinians thirst, Saudi intelligence meetings with Mossad exposed again and again, Qatari funds trickling into Gaza only with Israel's blessing. Every deal, every silence, every sealed border is complicity in genocide. Every action and every inaction is a mark of shame. And so I say to you, rulers of the Arab world, you may silence your people today. You may crush dissent with fear. You may bow before Washington and Tel Aviv, but you cannot wash away the blood of Gaza from your hands. You may think your thrones are secure, your wealth untouchable, your palaces unshakable, but history will not remember your riches. History will remember that when Palestine cried for help, you stood with the oppressor. When children screamed under rubble, you sealed the gates. When convoys begged you to let them deliver bread, you blocked their path with guns. When the world demanded justice, you chose betrayal. The world is watching, your people are watching, and God is watching. You will face him on the day when no throne, no palace, no crown, and no American alliance will save you. You will stand before him with the blood of Gaza on your hands. That day is coming. And on that day, your excuses will turn to...
The UN General Assembly is moving to Geneva. I'm told reliably the vote was 154-2, which tells you something. And they're moving there so the Palestinians, including Mahmoud Abbas, the recognized leader of the Palestinian state, can present their credentials for the UNGA session that starts on 22 September. And then we're hoping, we got our fingers crossed that he will present a letter that we have written for him. This letter requests the UNGA under its charter powers to call for, because Mahmoud Abbas asked for it, that has to happen, a protective force to deploy immediately into Gaza and stop the killing. Chapter 7 ROE, not Chapter 6. Chapter 7 is...
Can that happen without the consent of the Security Council?
Yes, the UN Security Council cannot stop it. It's a provision in the charter that was used in 1988 in order to let Yasser Arafat attend.
And where would these troops come from, Colonel?
We're hoping, and I've got an initiative working on this too, that we can talk the Chinese into providing the predominant number of the troops and then have others. As we saw at the SCO, there are plenty of countries that would probably contribute if China would lead, even Russia perhaps. We are hoping China will lead, and of course that means China would have to pay the majority of the funds for it too. But we'd also like to see China become a hell of a lot more active in the UN, and maybe we even might think about moving the UN headquarters out of New York and to some place like Shanghai, for example.
You know, I didn't see anything in the Western press, Colonel, about the vote in the General Assembly to move the annual September-October meetings, which, if you live in New York, you know is a big deal, to Geneva. I wonder why I didn't see that.
Nor did I. I found this morning when someone alerted me to it, and it's a Middle East press piece, and then I confirmed it. I Googled UNGA moving, and up came Arafat in 1988 repeatedly, and then down at the bottom, about the ninth hit or so, was UNGA on 2 September votes 154-2 to move its opening session and subsequent sessions if necessary.
Yeah, I wonder who the two were. I mean, I'm being sarcastic. It must have been the U.S. and Israel.
It had to be. It had to be.
Wow.
I can't imagine anyone else in the world.
Well, everyone, it's official. The situation in Gaza has now reached a tipping point, and Netanyahu's final plan for Gaza is so scary that it could change the entire future of the Middle East in a catastrophic way. Israel is now preparing for its final push into Gaza, and will not stop until it achieves a full occupation of the entire region. Now, to prepare for this move, Israel has caused the humanitarian crisis to reach catastrophic levels. Food and water are critically scarce under a full blockade, and deaths from starvation and malnutrition are rising sharply, especially among children, the elderly, and the sick. But as the world is standing witness to the atrocities being carried out in Gaza, something monumental is happening on the world stage. Countries like Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and France are now preparing to officially recognize Palestine at next month's UN summit. For nearly 2 years, Western governments and mainstream media have struggled or outright refused to call this war exactly what it is. But the images of Gaza today have become impossible to ignore, and it's time to call a spade a spade. This has nothing to do with Israel's self-defense, and everything to do with a complete annihilation of a region and its people. The power to end this unjust war lies squarely with Netanyahu, but as pressure mounts, he still hasn't moved an inch. Will the international community rise to stop the world's largest humanitarian crisis, or will Netanyahu push forward with his final terrifying act? Let's break it down in today's important video. Everyone, Netanyahu's green light for Israel's annexation campaign is not a sudden development, but has been decades in the making. Today, the remaining Palestinian territories are confined to the West Bank of the Jordan River and the Gaza Strip. Over the years, Israeli settlers have steadily encroached on the West Bank, establishing large, state-supported settlements on Palestinian land. These settlements are justified by claims that the land was divinely promised to the Jewish people. In practice, they're built by forcibly displacing Palestinians who have lived there for generations under the protection of heavily armed IDF soldiers. This systematic land confiscation and the expansion of illegal settlements have been overwhelmingly condemned at the United Nations. In fact, the vast majority of the world's nations have consistently voted for Israel to remove its illegal settlements in the West Bank. Yet, as outlined by this article from The Atlantic, Israel's far-right settler movement is now setting its sights on something even more extreme: the annexation of Gaza itself. While the West Bank has been slowly carved away by settlements, Gaza has remained relatively untouched, though not unoppressed. The Gaza Strip is frequently described as the world's largest open-air prison, as Gaza has been under blockade and residents unable to leave for the past 20 years. In 2005, Israel withdrew 8,000 settlers from Gaza, handing nominal control to the Palestinians, a move that many Israeli settlers never forgave. Today, amid the chaos of war, Israel's far-right settler movement has found a new opening to push its agenda. Fueled by the current conflict, right-wing leaders have begun organizing a political movement aimed at re-annexing Gaza and repopulating it with Jewish settlements. Since the war began, over a third of the lawmakers in Netanyahu's government have publicly backed the plan. Among the most vocal is far-right minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who recently declared, "We are relaying a message that from today on, we are conquering the entire Gaza Strip, announcing our sovereignty on the entire Gaza Strip, taking down every Hamas member, and encouraging voluntary emigration." His term voluntary emigration is anything but that. Once again, let's call it exactly what it is. Israel's far-right government wants to get rid of every Palestinian in the region and control the entire piece of land for the future. And now, according to recent reporting, this plan has officially been approved by Netanyahu and his far-right cabinet, despite significant pushback from within Israel's own security establishment. In fact, more than 600 former Israeli security officials urged President Trump to bring an end to Israel's war in Gaza in an open letter, citing that the IDF has long accomplished the two goals of dismantling Hamas military formations and governance. The reality is that public opinion holds little sway over Benjamin Netanyahu. He has far too much at stake to consider ending the war in Gaza. And as long as he remains in power, the offensive is unlikely to stop. In fact, there are three core reasons why Netanyahu is committed to continuing this conflict. The most immediate reason being his need to stay in power at all costs. In Israel's most recent election, his coalition secured just 48.4% of the vote, relying heavily on the backing of a far-right anti-Arab parties to form a government. These parties demand that he continue the offensive at all costs. Without their support, his fragile coalition would collapse, and so would his grip on power. But his incentive to continue the war doesn't stop at staying in power. Bibi is also facing corruption charges that predate October 7th. In fact, Netanyahu is currently on trial for corruption, facing charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. He is accused of accepting luxury gifts, including cigars, champagne, and jewelry worth over $200,000 from wealthy businessmen in exchange for political favors. In another case, he allegedly negotiated favorable media coverage with a newspaper publisher in return for efforts to weaken a competing outlet. The most serious charge involves claims that Netanyahu granted regulatory benefits worth over $300 million to a telecom company in exchange for positive coverage on its news site. Facing this plethora of corruption charges, Netanyahu's critics argue he is among the most corrupt leaders in any democracy today. But remarkably, Netanyahu has done everything to avoid persecution. This has included pushing back court dates by any means necessary, citing military developments, launching airstrikes on court dates, and even citing food poisoning to delay testimony. Getting tired of putting up with any sort of charade of going along with the legal process, Netanyahu has recently moved to fire the Attorney General prosecuting him for corruption. In reality, without the excuse of war, Bibi would have to finally face the charges levied against him. Last, and perhaps the largest incentive of all, Netanyahu needs to continue the war to push off persecution for war crimes committed in Gaza. The International Court of Justice has already issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Their warrants are for crimes including starvation as a method of warfare, intentionally directing attacks against civilians, murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts. These arrest warrants were issued in November 2024. Even if the evidence of targeting civilians wasn't already clear by then, irrefutable proof has since emerged, showing the deliberate starvation and attacks on Gaza's civilian population. Israel has now carried out a near total siege on food and humanitarian aid entering the Gaza Strip, which has led to widespread starvation among the population. Israel has blocked all sources of international aid from entering and instead have replaced established channels with a new organization of their own called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, in cooperation with the US government. These distribution sites are not staffed by humanitarian professionals. Instead, they are staffed by the IDF and US mercenaries. According to Doctors Without Borders, these sites have been described as orchestrated killing zones. The aid sites are intentionally placed in active combat zones, many miles away from where civilians are sheltering. Starving civilians, forced to traverse dangerous war zones to reach these locations, are often met not with food and care, but with flash grenades, pepper spray, and live fire used to herd them. Numerous videos have now emerged of soldiers deliberately firing into crowds seeking aid. And if you want more proof of the atrocities that are happening right now, listen to the words of U.S. military Green Beret veteran and whistleblower Anthony Aguilar, who described his time working with the U.S. and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation.
What I witnessed in Gaza, I can only describe as a dystopian, post-apocalyptic wasteland. We, the United States, are complicit, we are involved, hand in hand, in the atrocities and the genocide that is currently undergoing in Gaza. We aren't there on the distribution sites defending ourselves against Hamas. We are using indiscriminate force, targeting civilians, escalation of force that goes far beyond the measures of appropriate against an unarmed, starving population.
This testimony is unbelievable, and right now there are countless videos showing American mercenaries participating in these aid sites, including throwing stun grenades and indiscriminate shooting of live munitions over crowds. In fact, a recent video has gone viral, showing US soldiers evidently enjoying the abuse at these so-called aid sites. You have to be sick in the head to get enjoyment from watching people suffer, starve, and shot to death. But this is where the situation is right now. For nearly 2 years, all we've heard from Israeli authorities is we have the right to defend ourselves. But take a look at these images. Is this Israel defending itself, or is this the complete destruction of an entire region? According to the United Nations, approximately 92%.
In just a few weeks, the world will watch a procession of world leaders take to this stage to speak to the UN General Assembly. But this year, the familiar face of Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas will likely be missing, along with 80 members of his delegation after the Trump administration denied their visas. The State Department said that is, unless they condemn the October 7th attack, drop cases at the International Court of Justice and International Criminal Court, and stop seeking recognition of statehood. That last one, critics say, is likely the real reason for the move.
People like Mark Rubio, for example, take positions based on what Israel would want. I don't think the Israelis would want to have a Palestinian president in the United Nations in New York celebrating the recognition of 10 or 15 or even 20 possibly countries of the state of Palestine within a couple of weeks.
Of the 193 nations that make up UNGA, 147 already recognize Palestine as a state. But this year at the UN, at least 4 close allies to the U.S. have promised to do the same. Canada
intends to recognize the state of Palestine,
France, Australia, and the United Kingdom. And there could be more, according to the PA.
Then we will be getting very close to 160 states recognizing the state of Palestine, which means for those who are still the very few who are not convinced yet, how many more do you need from states that do recognize the state of Palestine and do believe in the implementation of the two states concept?
At its founding, the U.S. signed on to the UN Headquarters Agreement, which the UN spokesman points out.
Headquarters Agreement deserves to be read, notably, I think, sections 11 and 12. We obviously hope that this will be resolved. It is important that all member states, permanent observers, be able to be represented.
But the U.S. did that once before to a Palestinian leader. In 1988, the Reagan administration refused to allow the then head of the PLO, Yasser Arafat, to come to New York. So the UNGA voted to move the conference to Geneva, Switzerland. Despite the move, the world will likely see more leaders embrace Palestine as a state, even if its recognized leader won't be the one attending. Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Don't miss out and get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.
Listen from various peoples supporting me that first the United Nations must be shifted, especially headquarters, and Mahmoud Abbas, now when the whole world is recognizing the state of Palestine, is being denied visas with 80 peoples in delegation. So what good is that general body meeting? So I'm glad that it has been moved to Geneva, and that's a neutral country, Switzerland, I think acceptable to all. There I think in the general body meeting, not only the interforce force should go in, and I think even if they have to fight and kill every idea of soldiers who is occupying and committing suicide and crime in the Gaza Strip and West Bank should be thrown out. Even all the settlers should be thrown out at gunpoint, and the United Nations duty, and that must originate from the general body meeting of the United States, because there no one can veto it. And I think there they should make a resolution this time that this permanent membership with the veto power must be rotated amongst all the elected members, whether you have, I think, those members which make the United Nations Security Council without reason, nearly about 13 to 16. Many times I think Pakistan has been a chair of that, African, American, Eastern European, and I think so the veto power should also rotate, and it should be particularly, I think, if you look at the population, then I think OIC must be there, Turkey must be there and with the full power of veto. Pakistan must be there with the full power of veto. With China, I think the Japanese must be with the full power. Irrespective of that, I think even India, I would say that should with the large population of Hindus. I'm not talking of just the religious Christians or Muslims or Jews. I'm talking that if you want to be fair and be acceptable to others, give them the veto power as well, and let them sit and move the headquarters outside, so that this blackmailing thing of denying visa first to many years for Iranian president, and then you remember that in South Africa when it was apartheid, it denied always to the black Africans, they were denied many times. So that I'm glad I'm support with this. Some यूनिवर्सल टेलीविजन को सब्सक्राइब करना ना भूलें, उसके बाद बेल बटन पे क्लिक करें और अपने
कमेंट्स के सेक्शन में अपने कीमती जो ख्यालात का इजहार ज़रूर